Do you really need static credentials? We are just in time to find out. Hello, and welcome to the 2026 inaugural installment of the IDSA webinar series. I'm Jeff Rich, Executive Director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance. Welcome to those joining live, and as always, a time-traveling welcome to everyone watching this recording. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us today. And congratulations, you made it through the first quarter of the 21st century. Now you don't have to hear me count down the number of days until the end of the quarter century mark at every webinar. It's another 24 years before I start doing that again. So that's what we have to look forward to then. In the meantime, what we're going to do in today's webinar, and I recognize there's a theme. P0 is our member webinar provider today. As you can see here on the screen, there's a theme to the webinars that we've hosted with P0, and it's just in time. Today, we'll discuss how to eliminate static credentials, just-in-time SSH and Sudo access to virtual machines. Now, that's a mouthful. First, let's cover some housekeeping, then we're going to get to that. The IDSA is a nonprofit that provides thought leadership, expertise, and guidance. We offer vendor-neutral research, education, and best practices that help organizations like yours to reduce the risk of an identity-related attack. We couldn't exist without our members, represented here on the right. Membership is open to identity and security vendors, as well as every company and practitioner committed to the vision of an identity-centric approach to security. Membership categories range from contributing member to identity vendor and everything in between. Thank you to all of our members. Now, this session is being recorded, so share it with everyone that will benefit from viewing it. Leading today's conversation from member company P0 is Kelsey Brazil, the head of product marketing there. Kelsey joined bringing extensive experience marketing cybersecurity products and technical and landscapes across application security, SaaS security, and identity. Kelsey will be joined by Shashwat Sehgal, the founder and CEO of P0 Security, who has deep expertise in cloud-native observability and security, having built products for developers, DevOps, and security teams. So you have a great expertise from two different perspectives coming on the same topic today. Now, you can see Kelsey and Shashwat's LinkedIn sites and their company websites in the attachment section of this webinar. And there's some great resources they put in there that you can download and use. So please check out the attachment section of the paperclip here in the webinar. So now that I've gotten all out of the way, Kelsey, did I do this right, or was I just a bunch of static?
Never static, Jeff. Thank you. It's I'm always eager to hear what your pass-off line is. So thank you for having us. I didn't realize we were the first webinar of 2026. So we're privileged to be here with you and your community today, and it's always a pleasure. Great. Well, I'll be here just to moderate the conversation and dig through this pretty technical and nuanced topic with Shashwat. But I wanted to start off, Shashwat, just by getting a sense from you a little bit on your background, but also for the audience, why you started P0 in the first place.
Absolutely. Everyone, great to be here. We started the company in late 2022, so it's a little more than 3 years since we've been building this. And the motivation for me and my co-founders was really just that we had built many products over the years at a variety of companies, large and small. And one dominant theme was whenever our products got to a certain scale, our security teams would come up and say that, hey, your access to production is not secure. And we found that there were no good off-the-shelf solutions pretty much every solution that we evaluated relied on some combination of provisioning static credentials and standing privileges. And this was the time, late 2022, when cloud native technologies were really in vogue, and identity providers and MFA SSO were had become pretty much the de facto standard in all of SaaS. And at that point, we realized that, hey, there has to be a solution that solves access at the level of authorization for any identity. And that is literally what we set out to create. This what we call internally as a control plane for authorization, for controlling access for any identity to the production stack.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, with that in mind, I'd love to jump right into the topic at hand today. We are going to speak about SSH or sudo access to virtual machines. And I would love to hear from you. You started to tease it a little bit, but what is current state for most organizations today? And what are the core challenges that we've highlighted here? Can you break those down a bit further for us?
Absolutely. And maybe I'll set a little bit of a context as to why we chose this particular use case as one of the key use cases in our product. As we think about our company, and as we think about the core problem that users face generally, it's around controlling access to sensitive infrastructure and sensitive data that is running in a production environment. Now, most customers, most organizations around the world, depending on when they started, depending on when they moved to the cloud, they did a cloud transformation, their definition of production access is different. Some just deploy to bare metal servers, some deploy to virtual machines and manage databases, some deploy to Kubernetes instances, and yet others, especially the newer ones, they deploy to serverless workloads which are controlled by entitlements, right? A big use case is especially for customers that deploy their production applications to virtual machines anywhere, right? They could be in AWS, they could be in Azure, GCP, Oracle Cloud, or even their own data centers. And a lot of the times, due to a variety of reasons, customer engineers or support staff or QA staff or even customer success might require break glass access to those virtual machines. This break glass access is usually in the form of running SSH or sudo commands on a terminal. Why is this risky? It's risky because obviously it's a production environment. You need to control that access and make sure that people only have it on an as needed basis. And there's a lot of inherent risk involved. How have companies done this in the past? They've done this in the past by using the keys or the SSH keys to those virtual machines and distributing them to the engineers or the support staff that may need those keys. The inherent risk with such keys is that they literally hold the keys. They are the keys to the kingdom. Anyone who has those keys has standing access to production. So how have organizations tried to solve this in the past? They've tried to solve this in the past by requiring some kind of rotation on those keys according to a predefined cadence. And to implement that rotation, what they typically do is go out and implement a vault. This involves a lot of operational, it's very operationally heavy in nature, and it requires a lot of engineering effort to make sure that it is deployed, all this infrastructure is deployed and it's operationalized by the engineering team. And that's not all. Whenever people are trying to use these SSH keys, they are also tied to a shared account. And these shared accounts are also called as break glass accounts or sometimes they're called service accounts. They make it very hard or almost impossible to tie the activity to who was it that actually required the keys to begin with, right? Because from from the perspective of the system itself, it's a shared account or who's doing the activity, right? And why is this important? This is very important because auditors will almost always ask you who has privileged access to your systems. How do customers go around this? Well, vaults try to do some correlation, but it's never perfect.
So can you talk a little bit, and you touched on it, Shashwat, but how would you, how has the adoption of GCP and Azure, even Oracle Cloud, like how has that accelerated or contributed to the exacerbation of some of these pain points?
Absolutely. So whenever you are setting up a key in a vault, the assumption always is that you know what virtual machine that key corresponds to. And the big problem inside a public cloud is that there are orders of magnitude more virtual machines or more resources than there are in a tightly controlled static um, data center or an on-prem environment. What this means is that the size of the vault and the operational complexity associated with it just explodes. And what's worse is that many of these resources are being spun up and spun down very frequently without the security team having any visibility into it. And so they're always playing a game of whack-a-mole, trying to ensure that the vault is up to date. And again, it just makes the operationalization that much more harder, right? Um, so sometimes what people try to do is they try to cut back on this complexity by limiting access to production only via a few machines that are called as bastions or bastion hosts or proxies, right? The problem with limiting access via bastions or proxies is that it makes for a very poor developer experience because now developers have to log in into two different machines instead of one, and it makes the problem of audit blind spots that much more complicated because now you have to correlate activity on two different machines, right? So ultimately it all comes down to what is the simplest way that organizations should be thinking about uh, to to solve for the three problems. First is reduce risk, cut down access to anyone, cut down standing access to anyone who requires production access. Second, how do we make this as operationally streamlined as possible? And lastly, how do we make sure that auditors are satisfied and that any action is always tied to the corporate identity rather than shared accounts? Kelsey, are you muted?
Sorry about that. Thank you. I was saying that makes a ton of sense, and this graphic depicts some of that. Can you zoom in on where the breakdown tends to happen, or if we're looking at this attack surface area? You've talked about at the top of the conversation authorization. What is that shift look like? Why does it happen? Where is it breaking down? Tell us a little bit more, please.
Yeah, so this is really the crux of the matter, right? Over the years, the as technology has evolved from on-prem to cloud and increasingly to multi-cloud and completely cloud native, the ways in which we secure production access has evolved. From the early days, it was just using vaults, and vaults were good enough for giving humans privileged access to a very static environment of a limited number of servers in an on-prem data center. Then in the early cloud days, as the number of virtual machines started expanding, the very first thing that organizations started experimenting with were using bastion hosts and jump hosts and proxies. These are really the same name, different names for the same technology, which was again implementing privileged access at the network layer, or using network based controls, right? And increasingly, now that we are in a multi-cloud environment, and it's not just users, but increasingly non-human identities, service accounts, and agentic identities that need access to the cloud, the way to do so should be via authorization based controls and not via authentication or network based controls. And that is really what the future of privileged access should be. The future of privileged access should not be vaults, it should not be bastions or jump hosts. It should be access that is granted using the authorization based controls, or for the lack of a better term, control plane for authorization, which solves problems like giving zero standing privileges, eliminating static credentials, and providing just in time and just enough privileges for users.
Well, that's a perfect segue. It's like we rehearsed some of this, Shashwat. And so can you tell us a little bit, it's clear, hopefully at this point, the risks and the business drag associated with these static keys. And I'd love to hear from you how you can shift from this world of standing access to more dynamic management. What are the core tenets, and why are those the core tenets? What is the value that is associated?
Absolutely. So there are, as you mentioned, there are a bunch of different tenets that organizations should think about. Firstly, every organization has moved to an IDP with MFA and SSO for the vast majority of their SaaS infrastructure, right? What this means is that authentication to virtual machines also should always follow the IDP best practices. And what do I mean by that? It means that when a user is trying to get into a virtual machine, they should not be using a shared account. Shared accounts are very difficult to govern. It relies on tribal knowledge. What happens if the person that has knowledge of the shared account leaves the organization, right? You never want to be in that position. Ultimately, the authentication into a virtual machine should always, 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 and always be based on the corporate identity in your Okta, in your Active Directory, along with SSO and MFA enabled, right? And that is what we mean by IDP native authentication. Next, user experience is extremely important. Users should not be asked to jump from machine to machine, go through 5 different um, clicks or interfaces just to get into a virtual machine. The clunky experience of deployment and of management is one of the primary reasons historically that PAM deployments have taken a very long time to deploy, and as well as to being adopted by their eventual users, right? So being tightly embedded in dev workflows is extremely important for scalable SSH access. Next, as I was mentioning before, the entire concept of SSH access should be based on provisioning authorization. And provisioning authorization means giving the user just enough privilege to enter into that virtual machine and nothing else. They should not have keys to the kingdom that allow them to do everything under the sun. Next, this provisioning should happen just in time. They should not have standing access. Access should be tightly controlled based on the need and the time and the situation in which the user finds themselves. And last but not the least, to satisfy audit requirements, every activity should be recorded for the purposes of audit, right? These are really what I believe the core capabilities for shifting from using either a vault based approach or a bastion based approach, where there is no concept of zero standing privilege, to what I call as a modern PAM, which makes it very simple and very scalable to give secure ZSP for virtual machine access.
So you talk to customers about this every day. Is one of our most common use cases, especially in terms of modernization. So folks that have an existing vault or bastion in place. And with all of those different companies in mind, can you help make this real for folks, either highlighting some of like the before states or after states, or even some of the concerns of why they're like, we can't do this for XYZ reasons. We've been doing it this way for 100 years, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So customers usually fall into 2 or 3 different buckets, right? The first one, let's say three different buckets. The first one would have been using vaults for the longest time, right? And they are very culturally adapted, or set in their ways to thinking about privileged access in terms of credentials, right? And for such organizations, what I suggest is to imagine a world where they do not have to worry about credentials at all. All credentials, all static credentials are completely eliminated. Authentication is always tied to your SSO solution, which, guess what, it's operational already, right? It's actually cutting back the complexity for you. And the access is instead tied to authorization, which makes the job of everyone from auditor to the person in GRC to the person in security much straightforward. And at the same time, it also makes the lives of the engineers much more easier, because it just makes for a vastly superior user experience, right? So that is the first category of customers that have historically used vaults for something like this, right? Or as I call it, authentication based controls. The second category of customers are who've typically used proxies or bastions, or they jump hosts. Again, they're all the same technology but go by different names, right? And what these really are is a machine that sits at the edge of your network, and it either intermediates all access, or it provisions short-lived certificates, right? In either case, it's not provisioning authorization, it's provisioning network access, or it's provisioning authentication based controls, right? Again, in either of these cases, it's not provisioning privilege. Or, in other words, the user still has standing privilege or standing access to those virtual machines, as long as they are on the network, as long as they're on the bastion, the proxy, as long as they have the certificate. Even if the certificate is short-lived, right, you still do not have zero standing privilege. And again, that tends to become a problem for auditors, right? So what I suggest, what I always talk to these customers, I always suggest that, hey, think about a place where you want to be, and the ultimate end state is always zero standing privileges and zero standing zero static credentials, right? And same ideas before. Once you start investing in a modern PAM, you'll have all of these things without having to compromise on things that you have already gotten used to. And last but not the least, the third category of customers are typically who are starting their PAM journey for the first time. And for them, it's a no-brainer. This is already the best possible approach which they should be thinking about.
Right. There's less of the correlation of how they've been doing it to.
Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. We have a question that popped up in the chat asking how do you know what dynamic identity is taking what steps in a workflow?
Yeah. So if I understand that question correctly, I think what they are saying, what they're asking is, how do we understand what is the activity that is being recorded, right? And here, what we do is we link in this architecture of modern
Sure. It might help. Should I progress to the next slide to show our methodology so you have a backdrop to explain this? Okay.
Yeah. So the idea here of an authorization control plane is that it's the control plane is something that can take in any identity, whether that's a user identity, whether that's a workload identity, or whether it's an agentic identity, and it can control the entire life cycle of access for those identities, or the entire life cycle of authorization for all those identities, and help them secure access to any sensitive resource, right? Whether that's cloud infrastructure or on-prem infrastructure, servers, databases, Kubernetes clusters, so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, if you are an Okta shop, or if you are an Active Directory shop, just bring your own identity provider. The P0 or auth0 control plane links to the sensitive resources in your organization. It links to your corporate identity provider, and it creates this access graph. And what that access graph really does is it maps out the entire, each and every access path from any identity to any credential via any groups to any RBAC and to any resources on the other end, right? And using this access graph, the auth0 control plane can dynamically tweak this access graph to enable several use cases for customers. These include, as I said, replacing standing privileges with just-in-time access, governing non-human identities with short-lived credentials and automatically rotating them, modernizing PAM for your infrastructure, simplifying audit with session replays, so on and so forth.
So we got a clarifying follow-up on the previous question. They were asking specifically around the granularity in terms of the dynamic identity and how that's maintained.
Yeah. So what we mean by, because we can read, we can connect to any cloud environment, or we can connect to any sensitive resources. We can provision access to any identity to an arbitrary level of granularity. Historically, what PAM solutions have done is or IGA solutions have done is that they have provisioned access to a very low fidelity, which is, hey, I need access, let me get added to this group in Okta or this group in Active Directory, which will give me coarse-grained access to a bunch of things, right? But because we control authorization right at the level of the virtual machines, of the cloud environments, we can provision very fine-grained access for any identity, and that makes it very straightforward to implement least privilege across the production stack.
Great, thank you. We'd love to see it live. I think make this image come to life for people. So can you share your screen and give us a demo of how P0 does just in time for SSH?
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to start the demo using a command line. So as I was saying, the very first thing that needs to happen when a developer requires SSH into a virtual machine is that they need to log in, and instead of logging in to a shared account or use a static credential or get to some kind of a privileged account, what they are going to do is log in as their own identity, and the command that they'll run is p0 login demo octa. This opens up a browser window and it prompts me to log in to my identity provider. And what I can do is, as you can see, I've just logged in to Okta using my own corporate credentials. So the next thing that I'm going to do is going to log in. I'm going to try to SSH into this instance, and my experience is exactly the same as what I would usually do. But instead of doing native SSH, I'm doing P0 SSH, which is just a wrapper on the native SSH command, right? Once I hit this, this will check. This will tell P0 to check if I have standing access to this virtual machine or not. Because I do not have standing access, it will trigger a workflow. And now let me pivot over to Slack. This will create a workflow in Slack where an approver will get a notification that, hey, I'm asking for access to this specific virtual machine. And, the P0 app provides a very robust query governance controls, which enable you to put in governance policies like, hey, this kind of request should be handled by this team, or this kind of request should have multi-step approvals, or this kind of request should be automatically denied or auto approved. But for the sake of simplicity, in this instance, let's just say that I'm giving myself the approval to log in into this machine for a period of 1 hour, right? So I just hit approve, and this access request has been provisioned. And as you'll see in just a second, P0 gets me into this virtual machine. And let me just point out a couple of things that have happened. First and foremost, I have landed into this virtual machine exactly as my corporate identity, right? My corporate identity is Shashwat Sehgal at P0, and I've not logged in to this virtual machine as a shared account, as a privileged account anywhere. Next, what you should also appreciate is that I haven't used a static credential or an SSH key anywhere. All of my access has been tied to my corporate identity. And all that P0 has done is that it has dynamically granted me privilege just in time for a short-lived period, right? What will happen at the end of that 1 hour? At the end of that 1 hour, my request, my access will automatically terminate, and I'll be kicked out of the session. And let me just show you in real time what will happen, because I also have the option to relinquish my access. So if once I hit the relinquish button, in a few moments, P0 will identify that my access was terminated, and immediately my SSH session is terminated. And of course, behind the scenes, all the activity is recorded. Whatever I did on the virtual machine during that time, all of that is recorded as a session history for the purposes of playback, for audit purposes.
Fantastic. Love it when a live demo goes to plan. I'm gonna pop back up our slides here. We're just coming to the end of our session, so please, if you have questions, add them to the chat. I just want to highlight that we've made one of our guides available to you all. Just download it off the portal here. This is a comprehensive guide to modernizing your approach to PAM. So whether that's augmenting something that you already have or getting more of a replacement plan in place, this guide will tell you what to look for and some non-negotiables and how to quantify success along the way. And this includes the topic we covered today, which is SSH and Sudo access to virtual machines, but also that wider breadth of production coverage that Shashwat highlighted for us. So if there aren't any questions, thank you, Shashwat, for taking us through that, and I'll hand it back to you, Jeff.
Oh, thank you very much. Both Shashwat and Kelsey, we really appreciate this. What I really appreciate, and what I think not enough people recognize, is that this is a bigger issue than most people think. I still encounter people that think, oh, I'm not worried about it. I can just code in whatever the credentials are and rotate the keys. Well, that's better than not rotating the keys. Is usually what I answer with, but there's so much more that can be done, and I thank you for that, and I think people should pay attention, and I know people will benefit from hearing all this from a philosophical and operational point of view. So I want to thank both Kelsey and Shashwat and P0. You can view this and other webinars in the Identity Defined Security Alliance Bright Talk channel. We always want to get the best and freshest identity security information for you. I'm Jeff Rich, and we'll see you at the next IDSA webinar in our 2026 series very soon. Thank you for joining us.